Welcome to Lights Out at Houston Public Library. Today I'm going to read a story from Scary Story Reader by Richard and Judy Dockery Young. This is published by August House. So let's see what the story is. It's called Spin, Spin, Reel Off, Skin. In the low country of the Carolinas, all the folks know of and fear the evil women called boo hags. Sometimes someone we'll love turns out to be a boo hag. There are several ways to protect your home from boo hags and her evil lover, the boo daddy. But the best way is to paint your window frames and door frames blue. Now one night, a young man who had just married a lovely young woman who was new in town heard a noise in the attic. When he got up to see what was wrong, he saw that his new bride was not in her bed. He searched the house but couldn't find her anywhere. He went up into the attic and saw a small doorway in one wall, in a gable of the roof. It was a door used in olden times to raise furniture or trunks directly to or from the attic without having to climb the stairs or use a ladder. As he looked at the open door swinging in the breeze, he noticed something. The door frame wasn't painted blue. He went back to bed worried, but fell asleep anyway because he'd worked hard that day in the field. The next morning, his bride was asleep in the bed when he awoke, and he said nothing about the night before. That evening, after supper, the young man yawned and pretended to be very sleepy. Actually, he had told the foreman he was feeling bad, well, he was about his wife, and he had slept all afternoon under a tree without pay. Nevertheless, he went upstairs to bed early and pretended to be asleep. His bride came up later and lay down. He pretended to snore, and as soon as she was sure he was asleep, the young woman got up and went downstairs. She took off her nightgown and sat naked at her old ashwood spinning wheel. She put her foot on the treadle and began to pump it up and down, up and down, up and down. The wheel began to spin, and the spindle, where the yarn would wind up, began to turn. The young woman pulled on one of her fingers as if she were taking off a glove, and her skin came loose. She touched her loose-skinned finger to the spindle, and the skin began to wrap around the spindle like yarn. She began to sing, spin, spin, wheel off skin, spin, spin, reel off skin. And her skin slid off her hand, off her arm, off her whole body, and wrapped itself around the spindle in a tight, bloody blob. The woman sat on the spinning spool was now bloody, red, fleshless thing. Her eyes had no lids and stared like eyes in a skinned pig's head at the market. Her body was all red muscle and white sinew, like a butchered side of beef. She was a boo hag. The husband, who had snuck downstairs and watched it all from behind the door, gasped in fear. The boo hag turned and looked about. The young man froze in horror, holding his breath. The hag laughed a hideous, growling laugh. The young man in his stocking feet stayed a few steps ahead of the hag as he ran silently upstairs. The hag looked in on him, but the young man was snoring quietly as if he were asleep. The hag climbed the ladder like an animal and went into the attic by the trap door. The husband followed and watched as the bloody hag launched herself out the door. She stretched out her arms and soared like a huge, ghastly bird. After circling over the house and laughing a horrible laugh, she rose out of sight to meet her boo daddy, the real love of her life, somewhere above the swamp. As she flew over the town, the milk soured in the milk pans in the houses below. People's old wounds began to bleed again, and cats became mean and tried to kill their masters. The young man knelt at the attic door and cried for a moment over the loss of his wife. He knew what he had to do. He went out to the shed and got the blue paint. He painted the frame around the attic door in the moonlight, then shut it and latched it from the inside. Back downstairs, he went to the spinning wheel and unreeled the long, thin sack of skin from the spindle. He took it to the kitchen and got out the salt and pepper shakers from the cupboard. He poured the salt and all the pepper into the skin sack and shook it up to coat the bloodied inside. Then he hung the skin on a nail outside the back door of the porch. He went inside and he sat at the kitchen table with his elbows on the table and his head in his hands. By dawn, the lamp had burned low, and he again heard the horrid laughter in the sky. The boo-hag flew to the attic door and screamed like a mountain lion when she saw the blue paint. She flew down and around the house looking for a way in. Then she saw her skin hanging on the nail. She whooshed down onto the porch and crouched like a vicious animal, looking around for her human husband in order to kill him. But he was inside, waiting, knowing what would come next. The boo-hag sniffed her skin, but she couldn't smell the salt and pepper deep inside it. She lifted the skin sack and began to pull it on. She just pulled her face over her bloody skull and was almost human looking again when she felt the salt and pepper. The hag let out a scream like an animal trapped in a fire. Ah! She shook and squirmed and spun and screamed. She clawed at her skin and tore it to rags. Blood poured out of her flesh and ran across the floorboards of the porch. She spun around again and threw out her arms. She flew into the sky, whirling and twirling and out over the swamp. She spun faster and faster, trying to stop the burning, until she burst into 1,000 pieces of bloody red meat and bone. The pieces fell like rain into the swamp. The alligators ate well that morning. The end. Thank you for joining us for Lights Out. Have a good evening and hope to see you soon.